Hey fearsome friends, we made it to 3,000 subs. Thank you all so much for your support, and here's to the next 1,000. Although I have noticed that 50% of my listeners are not subscribers, so please give me a virtual hug by clicking that button and you will make me do big smiles. Tonight we return to the Let's Not Meet crew. So sit back, relax and remember, keep being creepy. I wish I could say this story was the worst she'd had to deal with. But what I can say is that she finally is safe, happily married and building her life back. For some context, I was part of an alternative high school program that was built into 3 parts, A, B and C. A was for learning disability and emotional issues, B was for freshman, sophomore behavioural issues, and C was for junior, senior behavioural issues. Every kid there needed to be there, and some of the terms I'm going to use might not be understood, so I'll just write PT to refer to the program thing. I'm now in senior year at high school, and I'm now part of the C program. My friend Bridget had graduated the year before from A, but we still kept in touch. One day we were talking when she announced to me, "I've been seeing Brad and it's going really great." Now Brad was by far the worst kid we had in C. Entitled, arrogant, and just downright mean. I remember once during class meeting, PT, that he told a kid in the same program that he was a waste of space and he would get into fights for no reason. I thought he was dangerous, and I told her this, but she just gave me the classic, "Oh no, he's really sweet when you get to know him." But we always know how that goes. The emotional abuse started before we graduated. The teachers knew about it and didn't intervene. I knew about it too, but she told me not to get involved, so I didn't. Hindsight, right? He started hitting her right after mine and his class had graduated, which was maybe 6 months in. Then a couple of months went by, and she thankfully broke up with him and got a restraining order. One night I got a call from her around 10 p.m, asking me if I wanted to hang out. I had nothing going on, so she said she'd come pick me up, which I thought was a bit weird because she didn't drive, but okay. When she arrived, she was with Kaz, the driver, and a kid from my class who I despised, and who was friends with many of Brad's friends. Kaz was that kid they kept around to make fun of. I made fun of him too, but my reasons were better than theirs. Bridget wanted us to make up and be friends or whatever, so fine, I'll go for the ride. All was going okay. I'm not interested in being friends, but I was civil, and 1 a.m. rolls by. That's when Bridget's phone started to go off. It's from Brad. He's asking me where I am. And when I tell you her phone blew up, it blew up. Every 5 to 10 minutes it was a message from him asking, "Where are you? Are you home? You better be home. We need to talk." And so on and so on. After about 30 minutes she just turned her phone off, and by 3 a.m. she wanted to call it a night. Because of the texts, I told Kaz to drop her off first. We all stayed in the car for a moment as she said her goodbyes and got out. I told Kaz to wait until she was through the door, as I know to never leave until whoever you are with is safely inside. We saw the door shut behind her, and she was in. Then immediately after the door shut, Brad jumped out of the bushes and ran for the car. He pounded on the driver's window, at which point Kaz floored it. He scared the crap out of us, but it also meant we'd left while he was on the property. I told Kaz to call the cops, and I called Bridget. I told her he was there and she already knew. Through the phone I could hear him pounding on the door and yelling, but thankfully all the doors and windows were locked, so he couldn't get in. The cops picked him up some streets over, and apparently he'd spent the night in jail. Finally he stopped after that, with Bridget at least, and the rumours are that he's like that with every girl he's been with since. I told Kaz to tell his friends that I made the call to the police. I didn't run in that circle, and I didn't care if they thought I was a snitch. If you didn't enable your abusive buddies, then maybe I wouldn't have had to have been a snitch. I'm not going to let my friend die over this maniac's issues. Always pay attention to the red flags, and stay safe. So I picked up a hitchhiker once that turned out to be crazy. Literally crazy. I won't ever do it again, and hopefully my experience will discourage you too. This was during the pandemic, and I don't know about your country's sanitary measures, but at that time we were no longer in lockdown. It was September 2019, and I was driving from my parents' house to a friend's apartment near our college campus. It was an hour-and-a-half drive there, and we had plans to spend the week together after not seeing each other for so long. Even though the incident is not related to my friends in any way, it just hit me on how dangerous it actually was when I started telling them what had happened. I remember one of them saying that this must have been the worst 45 minutes drive of my life. I laughed at it back then, but it hits me now on how true that was. I'd left quite late that day, around 9 p.m, because I remember the sun had already set, so I was going to arrive late, which I wasn't keen on. But I was used to the road, as I had often taken it. I would usually stop halfway at a McDonald's parking lot to smoke a cigarette before carrying on. This is important for later. So I came across the hitchhiker not long after I'd left my parents' house. It was after about 10 or 15 minutes when I saw him at the exit of a roundabout. He was a tall, slender guy with one of those tiny shoulder bags that guys wear across their chest. He seemed to be in his 20s, had just been dropped off by his friends, and was on his way back from a party or something. Which was stupid, I know, because it was still too early for a party to end. But that was the first thought I had, so I immediately felt bad for him and stopped. I opened the passenger window and asked where he was going, and realized right away that he was way older than I'd thought. He was at least in his 30s, and he had a really pale face. The way he looked at me honestly freaked me out. He said he was headed in the same direction as me, to the town where I usually stop for my break. I don't know what I was thinking, to be honest, and I just responded automatically that it was on my way, and he opened the door and got in. The next 45 minutes of my life turned out to be the worst. I don't mean to be dramatic, but it really was hell. I knew right away that I'd made a mistake as soon as I'd driven off, because as soon as I started, he held his stomach tightly, crouched himself into the passenger seat, and was rocking back and forth, saying he wasn't feeling good. I offered to open the windows for some fresh air, but he said he just had to take his meds, which he didn't. Saying I felt uncomfortable is an understatement. I remember thinking I'd really screwed up, and that whatever happened I should not stop under any circumstances. The first thing I did was to ask him if he would be okay if I dropped him off at the McDonald's. It had a well-lit parking lot, and there were always people there until midnight. Also, I could leave immediately onto a fast road. I think he agreed, but either way it didn't matter, because I wasn't planning on stopping anywhere else. I was already freaked out, though I pretended to focus on the road and tried to appear as calm as I could. He kept talking during the whole time, and I don't remember in what order it happened exactly, but I remember he'd asked me if he could look at my nails, to which I responded that I was driving. He apologized, saying that I shouldn't worry, because he had never raped anyone. He told me his girlfriend was mad at him and wanted to break up with him if he didn't come back. He asked where I was going, what I was planning to do that night, if I was planning to have a long steaming bath, if I had a boyfriend, and how we liked to do it, etc., etc. I told him that was private and that I didn't want to answer. He nodded, saying that he used to be young too, until he got arrested. No, that wasn't a typo. Young until arrested were his words. He insisted twice that we were being followed by someone, and asked me if I smoked weed. I said no. He offered me a cigarette, and I said that was nice of him, but he didn't have to. so he left it on the dashboard. He took out his phone at one point and wanted to show me a picture of him and a picture of his mum, saying she was beautiful. I took a quick glimpse and the freaking thing was broken, like it had multiple straight black lines of broken pixels. It was reddish on the left and yellowish on the right, which made the picture really creepy. He got mad at me because I was just taking a quick glimpse. Then he started talking louder at me, saying that I didn't give a crap about what he was saying. I replied that I was listening, but I couldn't watch because I was driving. He calmed down immediately and said he was sorry and wanted to show me another picture. He asked if it was my car, and I told him it was my parents'. I didn't want him to think I was rich or had any kind of money, just that I was a poor old in-debt student and leave me alone. I then lied, telling him I'd hit a deer last week. My mum had, but the memory came in handy, and I was trying to focus and pay attention because I didn't want to break my parents' car. I had hoped he would shut up after that, but he didn't. At one point I could see that he was just staring at me, and he muttered, "Poor thing," in a sympathetic way. He then straightened up and pointed to a road sign in panic and said, I meant road sign, poor road sign." Honestly, I think at that point I was thinking that if he did try anything, I'll crash the car, and both of us into a tree, because if I couldn't make it out, then neither could he. I am ashamed to say this, but I didn't want him to get out of this easily. He then screamed that his name was Archangel Michael. He asked my name, and I gave him a fake one. He said something like, "Michael, right?" Then crouched himself again in panic and started rocking back and forth, saying I shouldn't know his name. I just said okay, and to be honest, that was the only thing I would say in the end. When we came into the city where he had to stop, he asked if I could take him to the train station. It was almost 10 p.m. by that point, and I knew there were no trains, no lights, and surely no other cars or people around. I told him that I said we'd stop at McDonald's, and he nodded in agreement. He said I was nice, put a coin on the board next to the cigarette, and I stopped in the parking lot, but didn't park up. I just stopped right where I felt it was the most exposed. He got out and just said, "See you later." I drove away as fast as I could, and I never saw or heard of him again. So crazy psycho hitchhiker, let's not meet. For some context, this happened in 1998, when I was in 11th grade in high school. This was a large suburb of 85,000 with 3 high schools altogether, and mine had about 1,200 kids with 300 per grade, and 99% of the students were white, with maybe a handful of Asian students. It was basically a white suburbia, middle-class sort of place. Nobody was rich, but nobody was poor either. I recently had a dream, maybe even call it a nightmare, reminding me of a series of events that happened involving a new kid who showed up midway into the school year. Todd, which is his real name, was short, probably about 5'2", and he had glasses with red hair, crappy clothing, and basically didn't talk. All the things to get picked on and bullied for, except that he was not at all skinny. I, on the other hand, was tall and skinny, wore glasses and didn't have any friends, so I knew a thing or two about being bullied throughout high school, and well, he seemed to fit the criteria of a kid who was about to be bullied to hell. Well, he was put into my arts and crafts class, and boy was I wrong about what would come of Todd. Immediately within the first day of coming to our school, people began to talk about him a lot. They said he was a freak and came from the big city in our metropolitan area, which happens to be a very poor city, meaning that people didn't think he fit in at all. So likewise, within the first week, people started talking about how such and such was going to fight Todd after school in the woods. Now mind you, there were a lot of fights at my school, probably more than you'd believe, but this was the mid-90s and there was a huge amount of wiggers who clashed heavily with every other demographic, leading to fights in the cafeteria, in classes, in hallways, and so forth. But if there was a fight, it was quickly broken up, and it was usually pretty weak, with 2 kids getting suspended, and that was that. So the first fight took place. I didn't attend, but apparently a huge amount of kids did. And while I forgot the other kid's name he fought, he was popular, huge, and knew everybody. He most likely thought he could kick Todd's ass and look like a champion to all the other guys and solidify his place as a heartthrob amongst the women. Unfortunately though, word spread quickly that Todd didn't just beat the living hell out of the other kid, but he messed his face up really bad, and basically at the end of the fight sat on his chest and made him beg him to stop punching him. Rumors began spreading about Todd being a boxer from the hood and was extremely tough, and not only beat the hell out of the other popular guy, but he left him a bloodied mess. Well, a few days later he got in yet another fight, and again ripped apart the opponent. I have no idea how the fight was initiated, other than guessing that someone talked crap to him, and he challenged them to fight. The class he had with me, I never heard him actually speak to anyone. For this fight he was suspended for something like 10 days. And when he came back, another fight was scheduled, this time after school in the student parking lot. Now I was not only going to see the fight, but half the school was as well. So the final bell of the day rang and school was out. I headed out back where I was catching a ride with a friend since we didn't have school buses and I lived too far to walk. Of course I was hoping I could get a glimpse of this fight, since it was all anyone was talking about at school. Well, as I got outside, a huge crowd was building up in the hundreds, and Todd was there with another kid, whose name I didn't know, but he was yet another tough-looking student who people knew not to mess with. Before I knew it, there was seriously several hundred kids now gathered. The 2 got up in each other's faces, and the much shorter Todd stood there as friends of the other dude began spitting on him and screaming at him. Then they began boxing, basically. Rather quickly, Todd began punching the other guy very hard in the face, and there was blood everywhere, including all over Todd's clothing. Students yelling and cheering and going wild, and I'm not up front, but I see the other guy fall and Todd get on top of him, just as described in his first fight. Then several staff came running out, and they tried to stop it as quickly as possible. Todd and the other fighter were grabbed by male staff members and literally dragged into the school, absolutely covered in blood. The spectators, on the other hand, took off faster than a cat running from a dog as soon as the principal arrived. So that was that, and the next day everyone was talking about it. Apparently both kids were suspended for 10 days. I had never heard of such craziness. New kid shows up, looks like a dork, beats the crap out of the biggest kids in the school, and keeps getting suspended. Eventually, the baddest kids in the school began to talk about how they were finally going to mess this guy up when he came back to school. They would befriend him and then turn on him. Rumors spread quickly over the next 10 days. So fast forward, and Todd had returned to school. It was his first day back, and I was terrified of him, and most likely so was everyone else. He got up during a workshop session and said something to the teacher, most likely that he had to go to the bathroom, because then he left the classroom. About a minute later, the fire alarm went off at the school, and everyone had to evacuate outside. After standing outside for about an hour, it was determined that someone had pulled the alarm as a prank. It was somehow determined that Todd had done it. He was expelled and never returned to school again, and this was almost 25 years ago. It still bothers me to this day how it all played out, and about 15 years ago, when I could still remember his name, I looked him up online. He was not in the yearbook, and there was no way to know his name other than guessing the spelling until a match came up. Well, after a few tries of finding out what he was up to, I not only found a picture of him in the form of an arrest record, but I also found out he was involved in a series of armed robberies in the hood and was incarcerated at a prison in my state. I guess I wasn't at all surprised. I honestly felt like he was destined to become a psychopath or some sort of criminal person. Unfortunately, I forgot his last name and absolutely cannot remember it. Why did he ever show up at my school in the first place? And why did everyone just have to start with him? How many schools did this kid attend before and after mine, before most likely dropping out for good? I guess since I will never know what came of Todd, I at least will never forget the nightmare he brought to those few weeks of 11th grade. This happened about 10 years ago when I was 12 and my sister was 10. I lived with my parents and my younger sister in a usually secure neighborhood, and back then my father was still in college as a mature student, so on weekdays during the afternoon he would go and study and the three of us would be alone in the house. Now, to give you a layout of the house, in Brazil, instead of fences, we usually have brick walls surrounding the property. The front gate was automatic and opened to the side, but if we wanted we could turn off the engine, allowing the gate to slide manually. There was a smaller area before getting to the front door, which had little windows on both sides, so as soon as you'd walk in, you could see the entrance hall and the kitchen in the back. So it was around 3 p.m, and my father had already gone to the campus. I was in the entrance hall reading a book, while my sister and mother were in the kitchen, making something to eat. Suddenly we heard the gate being slid open, and my sister automatically shouted, "Daddy's home!" reaching the most logical conclusion. But my mother found it strange, since my dad usually arrived home around 7 p.m. At that moment she had been washing the dishes, facing backwards to the door, but then, when she turned around, the first thing she locked eyes with was this man who looked to be in his mid-20s and wearing a black cap. He was peeping through the glass window, staring at her, and when he noticed that she'd seen him, he ran to the gate. She froze for a few seconds, and then her first reflex was to grab my sister, me, and her purse, which had her phone in, and run to the bedroom. Before going in, she took a look outside, and saw that not only was the man still inside our property, but there were two other guys waiting by the gate. The one who ran was saying something to them, which made them turn to the door where my mum was. She didn't wait any longer and locked us all in, called my uncle, who's a police officer, and he usually did his rounds in our neighborhood, and then my father, who told us after everything had calmed down that he basically drove over the sidewalks just to get to the house as fast as possible, as the college campus was really far away. My uncle, fortunately, was in the area and came as fast as he could. He arrived with two other cops who went to drive around to see if they could spot the trespassers, which they unfortunately didn't. My parents had no idea how they were able to get in, but my uncle showed them. Apparently there's a little trick that intruders know in order to bypass automatic garage doors, override them and unlock the manual system. Since then we've upgraded our security to a really big padlock on the gate, an electric fence, and two angry dogs guarding the front area, and hopefully this will be enough. What's weird is that the house next door was under renovation, so there were a few construction workers in the street, but the cops questioned them, and they said that they hadn't seen anyone passing by. We don't know if they had something to do with it, or they were just blind. We don't know why the three guys gave up on breaking in. Maybe they saw us three and thought there were more people inside than they could handle. But thankfully they didn't, as who knows what they would have done to us. Every summer with a few friends, we take a trip to the seaside of France for about a week. Last year we decided to go to Hossegor on the southwestern coast to go surfing, but ended up in a small tourist village, an hour from where we were supposed to go, because of a reservation mess-up. The week was going okay, until the last 3 days of the trip, but the story I'm going to tell you is from the last night. So for the last 2 days we had been in trouble with the police and a few other tourists because of some misunderstandings over a pack of cigarettes. We had spent the last 2 nights stressing and trying to cool things off, and therefore we thought the last night there it couldn't be as bad as the other 2, as we were leaving the next day, very early in the morning. So we had only planned to go to a restaurant for dinner with some friends that we had met there to celebrate the trip. The dinner was going great, and we were all having fun, and as time passed by, it started getting dark. Towards the end of the meal, my best friend Dennis, who was driving us home the next day, thought it was best for him to leave early and not drink too much, so he could sleep as soon as possible and be in the best shape for the long drive the next day. He left about 15 minutes before the rest of the group, while we stayed and drank a bit more. We paid the check, and as soon as I got up from my chair, I received a message from Dennis which read, "Call me, there's a guy following me." So here's what happened. Dennis had to pass through a caravan parking lot and a golf course to get back to where we were staying. While he was in the parking lot, he'd noticed someone behind him that was about his height and size, who was wearing a hood and had a cap on. At first he didn't think anything of him, as the village was full of tourists, so there were a lot of people usually passing by. But when Dennis stopped to pee up against a tree, he had a glimpse of the guy behind him stopping and hiding behind another tree a few feet back. And as soon as he began walking again, the guy stepped out from behind the tree and started following him again up to the golf course. As Dennis got there, he was a bit creeped out, especially since at night the golf course is completely dark and empty of people. He stopped again for a second to light a cigarette and checked if the guy was still behind him. And once again, the guy stepped out of the path and hid behind a tree until Dennis started walking again. That's when he knew for sure that he was in danger. The guy wasn't physically imposing, and so Dennis thought it was weird he was so confident in following him. He thought maybe it was because he was holding a knife or a gun. But nevertheless, Dennis kept walking and acting as if he hadn't noticed him, even though the guy was following him again and had sent me that message. As soon as he picked up from my call, he talked loudly to try and scare off the guy by saying, "Hey, you're at the course with the other 8? No problem, I'll be there in a minute." But we were only 5 and absolutely not at the course, which was terrifying for me. But it was clever, because it made me understand he wasn't joking and where he was. I swore to him everything was going to be okay, and that I would be there in 5 minutes. I told him to be careful and calmly try to get home. As soon as I hung up, I started running towards the course, and explained very briefly to my friend that Dennis was in trouble and we had to get to him as soon as possible. Meanwhile, after I'd hung up from Dennis, he put the phone back in his pocket and kept walking. He took a glance back and saw the guy was still a few meters behind him. He took a last puff of his cigarette that he'd lit 2 minutes before, then threw it and started running towards our place. However, as he was running, he took a quick look back and saw that the guy had started running too. It lasted for about 5 minutes before he got in front of our house, which was empty. When he got there, he stopped for a second, looked back one last time, and the guy was about 10 meters behind him, in the middle of the alley, and then went to hide behind one of the cars that were parked by the side of it. As soon as Dennis saw that, he panicked, barged into the house, locked the door with difficulty, grabbed the biggest knife he could find, and waited on the couch facing the entrance to the house, which was a glass canopy. Once my friends and I had gotten there, he was scared but safe. He explained everything to us, and then 4 of us went looking for the guy. The neighbours hadn't seen anyone other than us, and even though we got to the residence at first in separate groups, and at different times, and through the 2 different entrances, we didn't see anyone coming out of them. He had completely disappeared. Nothing was stolen, even though we had left clothes to dry outside of the house, and nobody was hurt, so we didn't feel the need to call the police, but we warned the neighbours about it, and me and 2 others stayed up all night outside looking for the guy, as he had seen where we lived, and we were afraid he would return during the night. Dennis had been lucky that night. We never knew what this guy's intentions were, or if he was hiding something that gave him the advantage over my friend. Furthermore, he didn't even try to get into the house, which was doubly lucky, because there was another entrance to the place that was another glass canopy that led to one of our friend's rooms, and it hadn't been correctly closed. We couldn't even understand what he might have wanted. If he'd wanted to steal from Dennis or murder him. He had 2 opportunities to do something, but didn't. Once when Dennis stopped to pee, and the other time when he stopped to light his cigarette. So what did he want? Who was he? And where did he go? I don't think we'll ever get an answer. We can only hope that he never did anything to anyone, and was arrested if he had. This happened when I was about 15 back in 1997, but I've never forgotten it. So my mother had a rare neurological disease that would require hospitalization and intense steroid treatment from time to time. Since we were from a small town in Wyoming, she would go to the University of Utah hospital for treatment. These visits usually lasted 2 weeks, after which my dad and I would drive down and stay overnight before she was discharged to take her home. We were staying at one of the nicer hotel chains. I think it was a Hyatt, and my dad was watching some boring old movie on cable, so I decided to hit the pool. On my way back in my t-shirt and trunks, I noticed this guy sitting on a bench. He was about 5'7", with short blonde hair, black horned rimmed glasses, a red and white polo and tan dockers. I can still see him plain as day 24 years later. Well, his head perked up like a bloodhound on the first day of hunting season, and he started talking to me. He seemed friendly enough, so I chatted with him. He invited me to sit down, so I did. And about 10 minutes into the conversation, he slid down the bench like an ill-fated teen rom-com protagonist, and I just remembered not liking the feeling of him in my space. So I stood up. He then got all sad and asked me why I'd gotten up. Me being an awkward 15-year-old, I said that I preferred to stand. At that point, he propositioned me to go back to his room for drinks. I informed him that I was 15 and couldn't drink, to which he replied by asking if I was serious, because I was a big kid. I was 6'5" and about 265 pounds at this time. He said he thought I was 21. After another awkward pause, he asked me to come back to his room for drinks again. I took a look around, and the pool was closing soon. People were leaving, and I really didn't want to be alone with this guy, so I decided it was time to go. He followed me, the whole time saying, "I really wish you'd come to my room for those drinks." I got to a fork in the corridors where I could take a long, lonely walk to my room, or go down another hall, or go to the lobby. At this point, he put his hand on my shoulder and steered me towards the other hall. "My room's this way," he said, at which point I broke away and headed for the lobby, but he kept following me. I told him that I needed to arrange a wake-up call, so he hung back around the door. I went up to the desk and told the clerk that this guy was bothering me, so she called one of the security guys over, a 300-pound Tongan who I later found out was an offensive lineman for the University of Utah football team. Upon seeing this, the guy left, but the security guy walked me to my room anyway. I didn't leave my room again until the next morning. Maybe I'm wrong, but it was the way that finding out I was 15 didn't seem to faze him. I was a minor, and he should have backed off. I fully believed that he'd intended to drug me and rape me, and my gut saved me. When I was in primary school, elementary school for the US, I had a male teacher in his mid-50s who I knew from the start was creepy. All the other teachers and staff talked so highly of him because of how involved in morning activities he was. He'd come up with the idea of running a yoga class for morning sport periods. He would run the yoga class, and the other teachers would run the soccer or cross-country classes, etc. We were all about 10 or 11 when this started, and I would notice how during these yoga classes he favoured a couple of certain poses, like downward-facing dog. It was his ultimate favourite. And he seemed to focus on the female students more than the boys, which of course I thought was weird. He would tell us all to go to downward-facing dog, keep your head straight to the ground, close your eyes and breathe, whilst he would circle around the class and assumingly look at the girls wearing skirts and shorts. Weirdly, he made it a requirement for girls to wear only shorts or skirts for yoga, and although it wasn't completely obvious at the time, I realize now that he was recording it all for later usage. Also, he insisted on taking classes to swimming lessons at the beach. He would be really annoying about changing into a fresh pair of clothes in the changing rooms before going to and from the beach, and at the time I thought fair enough. But a couple of years later, when I was in high school, I'd seen on the news that this teacher had up and left school during the middle of a school day, with no indication of why or where he'd gone. People were worried for him at first, until they realized his secret. A day later it came out that another teacher found this teacher's sneaky camera pen device, which was apparently one of many. It turned out for all those years, yoga, swimming lessons, and God knows what else, he would have his camera pen watching it all. He would leave his jacket hanging up in the girls' changing rooms with the pen camera facing the students while they got changed for swimming. He was then on the run after being caught out, and I assume he thought he was caught out before he actually was, hence why he left during the middle of the day with no explanation. A couple of days later, everything was released to the public. This teacher had been selling and editing child pornography on the dark web, and you bet all the footage from the years at my school was a part of it. So many girls at my school were seen repeatedly in all the footage, naked, vulnerable and young. I'm not sure as to whether he did the same to us boys, but regardless, he was filming and distributing videos of my peers to other paedophiles for money, and probably watching it for his own sexual pleasure for years. They found piles and piles of footage on his home computer, and in the same house as his kids and wife lived in, oblivious to his true nature. He was eventually caught by the police, brought before the judge, and on behalf of his psychologist, he got away with it all. His psychologist apparently pleaded that this teacher was suffering from depression and other mental illnesses, and that it would not be fair to put him in prison. I have no clue why the judge felt pity for this man, but to my knowledge he is in protective custody somewhere else, away from where angry parents and teachers could find him. I'm sure he is still doing similar stuff today in whatever ways possible, and it makes me sick to think about this man being put on such a pedestal by other teachers and staff during my schooling days. They all assumed he was a passionate teacher who wanted to see kids reach their potential, but in reality he became a teacher to fulfill his sick urge, which he would still be catering to this day. I'm a female and in my early 20s. I moved out on my own for the first time about 2 years ago, and I haven't had much to do with any of my neighbours. You see, I've always been slightly uneasy about the fact that no one around here is looking out for me. Like if anything seems off, no one would notice or investigate to make sure if I'm alright. Last year I noticed a man constantly walking his dog in the grass area behind my home. This isn't unusual to see, as it's a common area for residents here. His dog is super cute, and my cat liked to play with it through the glass door out back. They would just chase each other back and forth, and put their paws up to the glass. Really cute stuff. Well, one day I was outside, and his dog came running up to my porch with glee to get pets and say hi to his kitty friend. This is the first time I actually spoke to this neighbour. We'll call him Mark. Mark seemed decent enough and we got along fine. We started hanging out pretty often in a short time period because I'm a smoker and he was letting his dog out all the time. And as it was summer, we'd run into each other often and would spend an hour or more after work most days talking. This lasted for a couple of weeks and I eventually gave him my phone number and was happy to have a friend in my complex. I will say now though that he was clearly very interested in either having a romantic relationship with me or at least being butt buddies. He said this quite a lot, and I was very honest with him by saying that I wasn't interested in either at all, and I had to tell him this quite often, and frankly I was getting rather irritated that this came up several times every time we spoke. He then rather quickly was trying to get me into his house. From the first time we talked until the last, he offered multiple times every time I saw him, and I always said no, blaming it on me being COVID cautious. He quickly got tired of that excuse and began inviting himself into my home as well, but I always said no. One day he came out while I was smoking with a bottle of wine and a couple of glasses, saying I had to try this stuff because it's delicious. I instantly noticed that the seal was broken, but it didn't seem like any of it had been drunk. The bottle was filled to the brim, which I also thought was a little odd, because usually wine isn't filled to the top like that. He poured a couple of glasses and didn't drop a beat in telling me to take a drink. I felt very uncomfortable, but didn't want him to feel like he was being accused of anything, when he's just trying to be a nice, friendly neighbour. After all, he'd poured himself a glass of the very same stuff, right? Well, my mama still raised me better than that, so I totally faked a sip and said it was good. After any sentence either of us said, he told me to take another sip. I told him that I don't really drink, so I'm pacing myself, but did say that I'd noticed he hadn't drank any of his, and ushered him to please go ahead. He didn't reach for his glass right away, but in the middle of speaking, he did reach for it, knocking it all over and spilling the wine into the grass in the process. He brushed it off quickly, telling me it was my turn to drink now. I said, "But you still haven't drunk anything. You spilled yours. Pour yourself another. I don't want to drink alone." So he did. But he still didn't actually drink anything. Again he told me a few moments later to drink mine, and I told him that he needed to catch up. We basically just kept going round in circles, him reaching for his glass and spilling it again, and him still insisting I drink mine. At this point I was done. Too many red flags are screaming at me to get the hell out. I was honest with him and said that this all seemed really sketchy, and I didn't trust the drink because he's refusing to drink any himself, but is way too eager for me to drink mine. He told me he was just clumsy and taking it slow, because he doesn't drink a lot. But he said that he had seen me have friends over taking shots and drinking beers and wine, so he knew I'd handle it better than him. So then yet another red flag was raised. He's been watching me. I think it's important to mention at this point that our complex is huge, and he doesn't live particularly close to me. He's about half a block away and can't see my windows or yard from where he lives, and there are a few different common area yards closer to him that he could use for his dog. I told him that I was flat out not drinking anything because of how this all seemed. He once again poured himself a glass, and once again spilled it. It was getting ridiculous. There wasn't much left in the bottle at this point. I poured the remaining wine into his glass and told him to drink with me on 3. So we raised our glasses, and to my amazement, he actually took a sip, but I spilled mine into the grass. Oops. Fast forward 2 nights later, and he came out while I was smoking, and instantly started complaining to me that I wouldn't date him or have sex with him, and he doesn't know why all the girls are like this. He started getting really loud about it, shouting at me and asking me what the problem was with him, why I won't do these things with him. I told him that I had been honest with him since I'd met him, that I wasn't interested in that, and it wasn't him specifically. I was just honestly not interested in that from anyone right now. But he still shouted at me and started complaining about his ex and her dog. Yes, her dog. Then proceeded to tell me that he used to abuse the crap out of the dog, and went into detail about how he wouldn't feed or water it because it used the bathroom in the house, and how he would kick it really hard. I was horrified at this point, especially considering this whole time he was telling me this, he is playing fetch with his little dog. The little thing always seemed scared of him, and I had pointed that out in the past. But he explained it away by saying that his dog's previous owners were abusive, so he's just very scared and distrusting. But the dog was always very excited to see me, and would cuddle up with me and stay by me, so I always thought I was extra special. But with that knowledge, I just think the poor guy is currently in an abusive household. I was so done with this guy that I just cut him off and said I needed to go because my friends were waiting for me. After that, he sent me several messages of just complete gibberish when he was outside. Literally gibberish, things that weren't even words, and it just kept going. He texted me telling me that he knows I'm home because he has seen me walking around, or that he sees my car in the lot. He will throw his dog's toys on my porch, I think trying to get my attention to come out because of the cute dog, and he'll just stand outside my porch for hours, even though it's all cold and wet these days, which makes it even creepier. I think in his mind, since I'm a smoker, I'll come out eventually. Silly him though, because I just go out front when I see him out there. He said several things to me before the wine fiasco went down that were obvious red flags. I figured it might be a language or cultural difference though, because English is his third language, and America is the third country he has lived in. I guess the moral of the story is just to trust your gut. Even to this day, he is still bothering me, and like I had said before, we'd only spoke and hung out for a few weeks in the summer of 2020. My last message from him was last night, asking me what he had done wrong and if I felt disrespected in any way. I haven't spoken to him since he screamed at me for not sleeping with him, sandwiched with admitting horrible animal abuse. I thought about answering his texts with the brutal truth about how twisted and creepy he presented himself as, and how uncomfortable he made me feel, but I didn't want to give him any ideas on how he should improve. Stay smart, folks. Don't drink things people give you if the seal is broken. He was definitely trying to drug me. My friend Aaron's grandmother, Jean, has a friend who she had an on and off thing with for a while, and his name was Johnny. Now Johnny has always made me feel a little uneasy, solely because he seems to try to act younger and cooler than he actually is. Also, he has a reputation for being a womanizer and a skirt chaser with no self-control, although I've never heard anything about allegations against him. Anyway, we went to visit Jean for Aaron's birthday, and Johnny showed up at the small-town bar hangout and was already presumably plastered. But to be fair, I've never actually seen him sober, so this wasn't surprising. He was excited to see me for some reason, even though I've only ever talked to him maybe 4 times, and he always does most of the talking. He's a very touchy-feely person, even with the guys, and his friends use the excuse of, "Oh, that's just Johnny," to justify his uncomfortable touching. However, this time, he went for a full-on front-to-front embrace with me, which already is sketchy at best, since he's 50-something and I'm 22. It went on for a little too long as well, and I noticed that his hands had moved down to my hips, run up the sides of my ribs, and went back down. It was fast and slick, but I felt really violated after a second, and told everyone in our group that it made me uncomfortable. Jean just made a "what can you do" kind of face at me. I tried again to mention it to her later when we were back at home, saying that it made me uncomfortable, and that he overall made me feel like this. I want to illustrate by saying that I wouldn't be okay asking him for a ride home by myself if I needed to, or something like that. But she just gave me the, No, he's not like that at all, even with me, and we've been together for a while. I made sure to let her know that I wasn't suggesting that I thought he was going to attack me or anything, just that I was uncomfortable with the touching. So it was after the weekend and we were all back at home, when Jean called Aaron to let him know that Johnny had been arrested for drink driving, which was no surprise at all, to which I coldly, but rightly I think, said, "Finally." He was also arrested for trying to pick up an underage girl. I called it. The whole time I'd known him, I'd had a gross creepy vibe from him. Trust your instincts, ladies and gents, no matter who vouches for them. So I know I was not seeing things, and I don't know what the hell was actually happening, or what this fruitcake was doing, but God only knows. I'm a 22-year-old female from a small town with a tremendous meth problem, and at the time I was living alone in my apartment across from another complex. I was coming home from the store in the black of night, accompanied by a male friend of mine, God rest his soul, to drink and have a smoke while we waited for our other mutual friends to get off of work. Now he would carry almost always, and I have the world's heaviest 1911 that I keep inside and also sometimes, but not frequently, carry myself. As like I said, there are tweakers everywhere I live, so lots of break-ins and thefts are as a result. I also keep a Louisville slugger by the door, in case I can't make it to the handgun. From my porch around the back of the building, you can see the dumpster of the other complex in the dirt parking strip and the nearest neighbour's porch. That porch also happened to belong to my now ex-best friend at the time, so naturally I keep an eye on it. Well, on this particular night, I came up to my porch, and my friend was lagging behind me for whatever reason, and as I was scoping her porch for the usual weirdness, I noticed across the street something that freaked me the hell out. There was a full-grown man on all fours, gallop crawling around the backside of her dumpster like an animal, and I just barely caught sight of it because of a passing car's headlights. I whipped around to my friend because by now he's on the porch, and I asked him, "Did you see that? What the hell?" "No, where? What are you talking about?" he replied. So I bust into my apartment as quickly as I could, and I snatched the 1911, because at this point I was really uncertain that it was even a human being at all. But I also knew exactly what I saw, and it was a dude crawling around faster than a human being should be able to on all fours. I didn't know if this guy was high, trying to break into cars, or evading the cops, waiting to attack my BFF, or what. I told my friend that there was a person or something by our friend's dumpster, crawling around and acting creepy as hell, and I rushed over there with him to hopefully chase this wacko off. I asked if my friend was carrying at the time, and he said he wasn't, but he could whoop the guy if he needed to, so no big deal. We crossed the street cautiously but quickly, trying to look everywhere the guy could have gone. We checked behind the dumpster, but nothing. Up and down both side streets, nada. We even checked inside the dumpster, but there was no sign. We then went so far as to check under all the neighbours' cars, go down the alley, and around the backside of the complex. It seemed as if this freak of nature had just upped and vanished into thin air. It couldn't have been more than 1 minute total from the time I'd seen him, or it, to the time we'd gotten over there to investigate. To this day I've never seen anything move quite like the way that person did, and it still makes me shiver. It moved more like something wearing a person, but I suppose it was just someone completely methed out. This happened a few years ago when my friend and I were in our teens. We are in our late 20s now. So we were walking to the house of a guy that my friend had a crush on, and it was dark, so it must have been around 8 p.m. We had to cross a bridge on the way, and as we were chatting and minding our own business, I happened to look down through the railings of the bridge just before the stairs we needed to go down, and there I saw this guy with his trousers around his ankles. I pretended not to see him, but I assumed now that he knew I had. So I quietly told my friend not to go down there, as there was a guy down there naked. Thankfully, we could just carry on going down the bridge, because it wrapped around after the stairs, but we didn't know that it took us to where he was. My friend saw him standing where we were about to come out at the end of the bridge, so we quickly turned around and ran. We noticed someone crossing the bridge, and I said to my friend that we should warn him about the naked guy. But she said no, as he was probably still back by the stairs. We also realized it was one of our high school bullies, so we didn't say a thing to him and kept going. Now, me being taller than my friend, I got a little ahead of her and stopped to wait as she caught me up, when suddenly she shouted, "He's coming, keep going!" So I regrettably started running again, wishing I'd waited for her to grab her hand to keep up with me. Thankfully she was fine and he didn't get her, but I've felt awful about that since it happened. We ran to a street and I suggested that we just knock on someone's door for help, when just then my friend yelled, "No, come down here." I quickly followed her when I could see the guy in the street that we were just in, and my friend and I went into some sort of shop that was open late. I just looked at the guy behind the counter and said, "This guy just showed us his junk and chased us." Feeling embarrassed, we rang my parents to come pick us up. We didn't tell the police, and when we told our friends about it, they just laughed, so it never got mentioned again. Safe to say, I'm so thankful I looked down when I did, but I don't know what he thought, what he would have done if he'd caught hold of 2 teenage girls. So just to preface, I don't do drugs, and that night I didn't drink, and I don't suffer from any mental health issue that could cause illusions. One night a couple of years ago, I was on my way home after watching a movie at my friend's place in a little village in the Alps. It was only 9 p.m, but it was already pitch black out, and I had to walk about 20 minutes before reaching the tram station. I tried to stay on the main road where there were a couple of cars, but at a certain point, I had to cross some tiny dark streets. I was scared and hypervigilant. I'm 5'2" and skinny. I know I have no fighting chance, but I always keep my keys between my fingers, just in case someone tries anything, and if they do, I'll make sure to take their eye with me. So I was walking rather fast and regularly taking a look around me, and every time I saw a man, my heart jumped. Then I just told myself that they're just going about their life, and I managed to calm down. I then found myself in a completely dark street, and the only light I could see was coming from a few houses dotted around. I began to walk a little faster, when I noticed a man in a trench coat and wearing a beret, and he was putting some stuff in the trunk of his car. My heart jumped out of my chest, as there was just me and him on that street. He was tall and had a large build, plus the darkness made him look much more scary. I shook it off and told myself that I was overreacting, and not every man out there wants to harm me. I kept on my way, and 2 to 3 minutes later, I heard a rustling noise, like as if something was brushing against the walls and bushes. All of my senses went into overdrive. My instinct told me not to turn around and just keep walking, but I can't resist, and I turn around. I saw the man in the trench coat for a fraction of a second, and he was kind of running or jogging in an almost cartoonish way, lifting his knees up to his chest and trying to be as quiet as possible. But as he'd realized that I'd turned around, he changed his pace and started to walk normally. I could only see the contour of his body at this point, and the few lights that were around us made his eyes glow. I'm absolutely terrified, but I managed to stay calm. There are only a few meters between us, and if I start screaming, I know for sure that he can reach me before anyone can hear me. And if I started running, he would either give up or speed up and catch me. With the difference in size, strength, and speed, I'd stand no chance. I have to be smart. Then I could see that in a few meters there was a turn, and after that turn, a few meters later, there was the tram station. I was pretty sure that if I could run until the turn, the people at the tram station would be able to see me. It was still a few minutes, so I kept walking and played it cool, and the distance between me and the turn became smaller and smaller. It was absolutely necessary for me to make this gap smaller so that once I'd start running, he wouldn't have enough time to accelerate to catch me. I know that he knows that once I turn, it's game over. As I was still walking along, I suddenly heard some stomping noises on the ground. Turning around, I saw him running at me. I have never in my life run so fast, and I didn't even know I could run that fast. I didn't look back, and I focused on the turn and the lights ahead. I can't scream for help, I can only run, and I can feel him right behind me. I'm now only a meter away, and in my mind in that moment, I felt like he was literally about to grab me, when finally I took the turn and kept running for a little bit. I could see two guys walking in my opposite direction, which makes me feel a bit safer. I stopped to take a breath, to see if they noticed me, but they don't seem to care about why I was running like my life depended on it. I turned around to see the man with the trench coat, standing on the turn in the dark. He was looking at me. I still couldn't see his face entirely. And still spooked, I can see that the tram station is a few meters away, and I see the people and I hear the chatter. I am safe. Afterwards, I got a feeling that is almost just as scary as what just happened. I started questioning myself, my senses and my sanity. I was so scared that something like that would happen, that I worried my mind made it all up. Was it maybe an illusion triggered by fear? What makes it worse is that because of the darkness, I couldn't make up his face, and the trench coat, the beret, the goofy and cartoonish way he was moving was just too much, and too similar to my worst nightmare. When I got home, there was no one around. I got in, locked all the doors and windows, turned all the lights on, and broke down in tears on my bed. I felt like I was crazy, and like I'd just imagined it all. Now 2 years later, I am almost 100% sure it was all real, but at times I still doubt myself. His shadow still haunts me. This story isn't mine, but one that was told to me by my nanny. It was more like a grandma figure to me when I was younger. This story has stuck with me vividly all these years, and in it I'll call my nanny Sarah. Sarah was a teenager in the 60s, and she was with her mum visiting family out in the country. They were staying in a house with Sarah's uncle, aunt and 2 cousins, and one summer night Sarah and her cousins, both girls and also teenagers, were out late drinking beer. They started their drive home around 1 a.m, and they were about 30 minutes away from the house, going straight along a rural road that went on for miles. It was pitch black with no streetlights, and they were about 10 minutes away from the house when they noticed a truck was behind them. At first they thought nothing of it, but the truck continued to get closer and closer until it was right on their tail. Sarah and her cousins began freaking out and driving faster, but so did the truck. Then it turned on its brights. Sarah told me they just kept driving faster and faster, but the truck kept up with them, following close behind, and it was so bright they could barely see. Finally they got to the house and turned onto the dirt road it was on, which, as they were about to realize, was a bad decision. The dirt road only had one access point, and as soon as Sarah and her cousins pulled in towards the house, the truck pulled into the driveway, swerved sideways, and blocked the only exit. 3 men then slowly got out of the car holding large objects that Sarah couldn't quite make out. At this point it was nearly 1:30 a.m. when Sarah heard her mother screaming from the house, "Run!" Sarah and her cousins bolted into the house, slamming the door shut and locking it behind them. Only moments later the doorknob began rattling and the men began banging on the door. The men then began walking around the house, trying to get into every window they could find. After about 30 harrowing minutes, they seemingly gave up. I guess they didn't have a phone at the time, so they had no way to call for help. The biggest question Sarah had was why her mum was awake in the middle of the night, and how was she outside at just the right time. She had no way of knowing that Sarah was in trouble. Sarah's mum said she'd had a dream that something bad was going to happen to her, and she woke up in a sweat with a terrible feeling. She went outside to see if their car was back, to see if they'd made it home safely, and that's when they pulled into the driveway. So this is not my story, but a co-worker's, so I may not have every detail exact. At my co-worker's church, they have a very large youth program and do lots of different activities with the youngsters. They have a building that is separate from the main part of the church, in which they do a lot of the activities, as well as, I believe, some Sunday school classes. One of the things they do a lot is put on plays or do different things that involve costumes, so you can imagine that they have lots of costumes for Christmas plays and things like that. They kept all these costumes in the youth building upstairs in a sort of attic space. This is an important detail that makes the following events even more creepy to me. It was a little over a year ago when this happened, if I recall correctly, and the youth group had finished with one of their weekly meetings, which I assume ended later in the evening, as it was already dark outside. And after events such as these, the church has specific members that come by to lock up and make sure everything is turned off. This particular night, there was an elderly gentleman that was responsible for locking up, and he arrived at the church a little later than normal after everyone had gone home. He was walking through the building, turning off lights, and as he was on his way back outside, he noticed something out of the corner of his eye in one of the darkened rooms. What he thought he saw was strange enough to cause him to turn around and go back to take a look. When he got to the door, there was a large, robed figure just standing in the room, holding a lit candle. Now this is the point where I would have simply died or ran for my life, but this brave soul simply turned on the light to see a grown-ass man wearing one of the Christmas costumes and holding a candle. Again, I would be a dead puddle on the floor, but this dedicated congregant simply stood his ground and asked the robed figure, "Can I help you?" The creep quickly came up with a story in reply. He said that he had been at a store down the road with his friends, but they left him there, and when he was walking home he got cold, so he found said building and put on the robe, then lit a candle so he could warm up. Once again, sweet little gentleman surprises all of humanity and asks the dude if he would like a ride home, and the creep accepts. Little man told the creep that he can't keep the robe or candle, so he took it off and grabbed a bag off the floor, and they walk out to the car together. So the little guy takes the creepy man home, making small talk all the way, nothing major. When they pull into the guy's driveway, they are suddenly surrounded by a couple of cars that pull in right behind him. I would have pushed the weird dude out of my car and driven over the top of anyone that was in my way, because obviously that was an ambush, but actually no. A couple of guys just jumped out of their vehicles and meet the weirdo at his door, asking him, "Dude, where have you been?" Creepo thanks little guy and he and his friends go inside, and that was that. Or was it? When the little man gets home, his wife is worried sick because he wasn't home as soon as he should have been. She scolded him after he told his story because it could have ended up horribly, but all is well and they go to bed. The next morning, they are watching the news, and there is a report that a grocery store had been robbed the previous night by a group of men. The getaway car took off without one of the robbers, but he left on foot with a bag full of loot. They threw a picture of the main suspect up on screen, and guess who it was? Yep, creepy robe dude had robbed the store and was hiding out in the youth building to evade the cops. I guess his story was kind of true. But the silver lining of this whole thing is that he was dumb enough to let little church guy drive him right to his actual home. So little church guy obviously called the cops and was able to lead them right to the idiot's house. I just find it so disturbing that the guy went rifling through an attic space in a little church building and put on a robe and just stood in the dark with a candle. What was the purpose of the robe and the candle? Did he think he would blend in better that way? Although this story had a good ending, so many things could have happened to the little old man. I personally would have soiled myself if it was me in that situation. This story happened around 4 years ago when we'd moved into a new house, and I was 15 years old. We live in a very small tourist town, a population of 700 not during tourist season kind of small. And as in most small towns, you have renowned people that you see most days, but never actually know. One of these people in our town was this weird druggy guy that everyone knew of and hated. He was living in one of his parents' houses until they kicked him out for not paying rent. My parents were friends with the family of this guy and helped take care of his kids when he couldn't, so we were particularly on pretty good terms. They gave the druggie, I'll call him just D, 30 days to move out for failing to pay a single rent check in his miserable life. At the same time, we weren't doing very well at all financially and needed somewhere to live, so we began talking to D's parents about the house, and they said we could begin a rent-to-buy contract as soon as he moved out. The 30-day mark came around, and we asked D if he was ready to leave, but he acted like he knew nothing about what we were talking about. Surprisingly, his parents had said they were going to give him some extra days and help him move his stuff, but we ended up waiting another month. At this point, we had only a few days to be out of the current place we were staying in. We went to the new house that we'd been waiting for, and when we went inside, all of D's stuff was still there. We couldn't wait any longer, so decided to just bag his stuff up, telling him he had to come get it. Now fast forward a year after living in the new house. We'd hear scurrying sounds often, like mice and similar animals were in the ceiling, but we have a lot of strange animals as pets, like mice, snakes, lizards and chinchillas, etc. One day, one of our 4 snakes had gone missing from its enclosed tank. We couldn't figure out how though, as there were no holes anywhere to be found. We thought nothing of it, except that it was a bit strange, and as time went on, we started hearing louder noises around the house. Our dad said it was just the house settling, but then stuff was beginning to disappear from the fridge. The electrical bills went up, and we could smell smoke. Us kids got blamed for all of it, and got our phones and my PC taken away. But even after that, the power bill was still high. I also got blamed for smoking in the house, which my parents had no reason to believe, so I was grounded until graduation. I was really mad now, because I did not smoke in our house. One particular day, I was unbelievably bored, not being able to do anything, so I decided to explore our attic. I opened the door, and that's when I saw it. "Holy crap," I shouted. My mum came right up the ladder, ready to beat me, but then she saw it too. There was a bed, a microwave, a mini-fridge, cigarettes, and unsmoked blunts, etc. Guess who? It's Druggy. He returned that night through my little sister's window, and he was higher than I have ever seen a person. He admitted to all the weird stuff that had been going on in the house, and we recorded it. He'd taken the snake and let it loose to get rid of the mice, and it was him smoking. He'd also snuck in through my little sister's room every night. In court, he also admitted to making a small hole in the floor of the attic so he could watch my little 11-year-old sister sleep at night. We changed all the locks, got a Ring doorbell, placed higher security locks on all the windows and more. And the worst part of all, this creep only got 6 months probation for marijuana possession, which wasn't yet legal in my state. He got only 1 year of prison for breaking and entering for an entire year, almost every day. What kind of bull system is that? He did have to pay a pretty heavy fine for damages, and had to pay us back a year's worth of our electric bill though, so that's good. We are now out of debt, and my parents are living steadily because he finally finished paying all the fines to us. My sister has to go to a therapist twice a week, and might never get a good night's sleep again. Hey there, it's me again, Miss Fearsome. I hope you enjoyed my video. If you did, then please hit that subscribe button. And if you'd like to support me further, please check out my Patreon and sign up for as little as $1 a month. Also, check out my new YouTube membership levels for some exclusive perks. So until next time, stay happy, stay safe, and remember, keep being creepy.